When police arrived at the scene, they found a body of a woman that had been badly beaten.
She had numerous injuries, more than 20 in total, mainly to her head.
She was covered in blood. It was a shocking sight.
She'd been battered to death. It looked like there'd maybe been a burglary.
The house had been ransacked.
The fact that this has happened in broad daylight, at a time when people are taking their children to school, it strikes fear throughout everybody.
A lot of people are scared living around here.
You just can't believe that it's happened.
The big fear is that our community is then under threat.
Of the East Midlands lies historic Lincoln.
It's just got a wonderful, timeless feeling to it, Lincoln. We are a place of great historical interest. We've got everything, castles, cathedrals. There's a great many medieval churches, and there's a great waterway in the centre as well, the Brayford, established by the Romans. So we are a good tourist destination. And people like the fact we're not overly commercialised. We just think it's a wonderful, vibrant place.
And in recent years, Lincoln has become increasingly popular with overseas students.
The university, which is a huge university and, well, pretty much world famous, they've got colleges as well. Well, there are a lot of students, and a lot of the students are foreign nationals, many from the East Asian area. There is a nice mix.
To the south of Lincoln, on the River Witham, lies the suburb of Sincil Bank.
Sincil Bank area of Lincoln is a very tight-knit community, being adopted by the students and working-class Lincoln folk. A stone's throw away from the football ground, and it does have a very villagey feel. You will see children playing football in the street.
The Sincil Bank community is very diverse. I've been a resident my whole life, and we have a lot of people that are from different ethnic backgrounds. And because we're so close to the university and stuff, we do get a lot of uni students coming to live down here, especially now that the university's getting more popular. We also have a lot of elderly people, but we always try and find a way to build that community together. It's more like a village. People are always supportive of each other.
It's just a nice, friendly place. Everybody knows everybody on the street and everybody chats with everybody. All the kids play out together. It's got a proper community vibe.
It's very close to the South Common, which is the major green area in the south of Lincoln.
You know, there's a lovely park there where people go and walk their dogs and can go and sit. So you have got the nice, idyllic, peaceful park. It's only a short distance away.
But the peace is shattered on one summer's day. At 12:20 p.m, police are called to an address in Sincil Bank.
When police arrived at the scene, they found a body of a woman that had been badly beaten. She had appeared to have been beaten with a blunt object.
The crime scene is secured.
The police came, they cornered off the streets, they weren't allowed anywhere near houses and stuff. No one really told us what happened.
A murder investigation is immediately launched, and it's not long before the body is identified as 29-year-old student Mingzi Yang. But who is Mingzi, and how had she become a victim of such a brutal murder?
Mingzi Yang was originally from China. She came to the UK in 2008, and she was studying English at Lincoln College. Initially, she lived in the Humberside area, and in 2012, she moved to the address in Sincil Bank, where she lived with her partner, who she'd met fairly recently, Darren Grundy, and her young 5-year-old son.
Mingzi's son was from a previous relationship, but Darren quickly became part of the family.
As a couple, they were engaged to be married and were due to get married the following year.
But on the 17th of June, Darren had grown increasingly worried throughout the day when Mingzi failed to answer her phone.
He'd gone to work and he'd been trying to get hold of her throughout the day and without any success. So he left work early and made his way to the address.
Darren arrives home and makes a shocking discovery.
He found a scene of devastation, really. It looked like it had been ransacked. It looked like there'd maybe been a burglary. There was a lot of blood in the address, and he discovered Mingxi's body.
And then he raised the alarm and the police were contacted.
As the police begin their investigation, they need to establish what Mingxi's last known movements were on the day of her murder.
Detectives will use a phrase sometimes that says if you find out how a person lived, then you'll find out how they died. It's about building up a detailed picture of that victim, because somewhere in there might just be the answer as to why this has happened and who's committed it. On the morning of the 17th of June, she'd gone and took her young son to the local primary school, which was a very short walk away, and returned to the address.
The killing was believed to have taken place in broad daylight, early in the morning after school, although the body wasn't discovered until Mr. Grundy raised the alarm.
The question is, who could possibly have wanted to harm Mingxi?
First thing that would go through my head is to try and establish exactly what has gone on.
The initial mystery for the police was that the house had been ransacked. There had been a burglary, and that possibly an intruder had killed Mingxi Yang.
News that a possible burglary has turned into a murder sends shockwaves across the local community.
There was fear and a sense of shock, because it's not something that happens with frequency in Lincoln at all. And the big fear is that our community is then under threat.
I remember hearing about it. My mum and my dad told me about it, and it was very upsetting. It's very traumatic knowing that it's basically on your front door. You know, you could go to sleep at night and something bad could happen. This could have been my mum, or this could have been my sister, or this could have been a relative that lives across the road.
Everybody was massively scared of what had happened because it was so close to home. It's 2 minutes away from the pub that I run, so that day customers were coming in absolutely shocked and stunned with all the police cordons. It just is unheard of around here. You just can't believe that it's happened.
There was a genuine fear from people who lived in the local area that a burglar or intruder was at large and had carried out such a devastating crime in broad daylight. Neighbours were obviously concerned that this could possibly happen to them.
In the Lincoln suburb of Sincil-Bank, the community is shocked to hear of the murder of 29-year-old mum, Mingxi Yang, who has been beaten to death in her own home in what looks like a robbery gone wrong.
She was a local student. She'd got a child. We just couldn't believe that somebody like her had been killed.
And the fear on the streets is growing.
A lot of people are scared of living around here, knowing that something really bad's happened, and it's on your front door.
The first feeling is one of shock, and then wanting to know really what had happened. Was the public at risk?
When something like this happens in the community, there's a massive impact. There's lots of children and families in this area, so to have something so tragic and awful happening on your doorstep, it strikes fear throughout everybody.
That's all we were talking about. Everybody was just in utter disbelief that something like that could happen so close to home.
And a lot of them will have been friendly with Mingxi Yang in any event, so apart from the personal impact, you really do get a build-up of tension throughout the community. People feel understandably frightened. Who's committed it? Why have they committed it? Are they going to come back and do it again? If it is a burglary, is our house going to be the next target?
With such a brutal murder happening on a busy street, police are taken aback at the boldness of the crime.
Mingxi had a young son who had been dropped off at school, and the killing was believed to have taken place sometime between about 9 and 10 a.m.
The fact that this has happened in broad daylight, at a time when people are taking their children to school, in a place like this, which appears quite peaceful and tranquil, is actually quite shocking.
The idea that an intruder had managed to get into this house unnoticed and carry out this killing was obviously very frightening for local people.
With the attack suspected to have occurred early in the day, police reach out to the locals for any potential information that may lead them to Mingxi's attacker.
You're really looking for witnesses. Something that's happened like that with so many injuries and so much devastation within the house would presumably have made some noise. You know, had she been screaming and shouting for help? Have the neighbours heard or seen anything?
In a case like this, in an area like this, the community are absolutely vital. They are the eyes and ears, and they're going to know things and see things that the police will never get to find out about. So it's really important to get out in amongst the community and make yourself visible and ask those important questions, because just by being here, you may be approached by a member of the public who tells you something that in isolation might seem quite minor, but actually, when you put it together as part of a jigsaw puzzle, it could actually help to solve the case.
Local reporter Richard Van Plu is also on the scene.
The first time I became aware of Mingsy's death was when the police put out a press release saying that the body of a woman had been found. Killings like this, obviously in rural areas, don't happen every day, and people are quite rightly shocked. And sometimes when you arrive at the scene, people will talk to you. It's their main way of dealing with what's happened.
But so far, door-to-door inquiries have uncovered no leads to Mingsy's attacker. With the fear in the area growing, forensics arrived to examine the scene.
When I arrived at the scene, it was a shocking sight. Mingsy was face upwards and she was covered in blood. She was in the main living room. There was large, pooled, smeared blood staining on the carpet all around Mingsy's body. There was a white radiator near where Mingsy's body was found, and there was spots of blood spattered onto the white radiator. The smears and pools of blood along the carpet had indicated to me that she'd been assaulted at one end of the room, and she was on the floor crawling towards the kitchen in an attempt to escape. The blood spatters on the radiator and on the adjacent wall indicated that as she was crawling along, she was being...
Further adds to the horrific nature of Mingsy's death.
A post-mortem found Mingsy's injuries were quite severe.
She had numerous injuries, more than 20 in total, mainly to her head. She also had, interestingly enough, some defence wounds, including a fracture to one of her hands, which clearly indicated that she'd been trying to fend the attacker off. But the actual number of injuries and the nature of those injuries were very, very severe, and would only ever have resulted in one thing, which was her death. She'd basically been battered to death.
But as police scour the scene and surrounding areas, there is no sign of the murder weapon.
The weapon used was believed to be a very hard, heavy, blunt object. But interestingly enough, it wasn't recovered from the scene, which suggests that potentially the offender may have possibly brought it with them, but certainly taken it away with them, which does suggest a degree of premeditation and planning and the realisation, even in the moment of everything happening, that actually they might have left some evidence on that weapon.
Police start to suspect that their initial theory, that Mingsy disturbed a burglar who then attacked her, could be wrong. This is reinforced when detectives examine Mingsy's possessions.
Burglary is normally where somebody goes in and steals something. Sounds fairly obvious, but that's what happens. So if there were items in that house, such as TVs, electrical goods, jewellery, cash, you would expect someone that's committing a burglary to take those. The fact that items didn't appear to be missing is really important.
And new forensic evidence casts further doubt that Mingsy disturbed a burglary taking place.
The perpetrator had gone upstairs and opened a number of drawers, which made it look like a burglary. However, the intruder had done this after he'd assaulted Mingsy. We know that because Mingsy's blood was on the stairs in the form of footwear marks, and her blood was on the drawers in the form of finger marks, glove marks in blood. In my mind, your average burglar, if they're startled, they're just going to want to get out of the property. They don't want to harm anybody, they just don't want to get caught. Why would a perpetrator repeatedly beat Mingsy and then take the risk of going upstairs to see if they could find something in her bedroom? It just didn't quite add up.
By re-examining the post-mortem results, police suspect this attack may actually have been carried out by someone closer to home.
The nature and the number of injuries and the fact that they were all caused to Minxie's head area is a suggestion that perhaps this is a little bit more personal. It's almost like a humiliation and perhaps not just a stranger attack or a burglar that's been disturbed.
Considering the nature of Mingsy's injuries, the police would have to consider whether this was an argument that had gone wrong.
In the majority of murder cases, there is some kind of connection between the victim and the offender.
90%. Mr. Sang was asked to provide a written statement of his movements on the 17th. He disclosed to police that he had taken the day off work.
Zhang's statement explains why he took the day off and outlines a clear alibi for the time Mingsi was murdered.
He had the day off work and he went to Sherwood Pines in the Nottingham area where he went trail biking.
And he could provide car parking tickets and receipts to back this up.
With a solid alibi and evidence to prove it, Zhang is discounted from the inquiries. So police shift their focus elsewhere, and to one person in particular.
The police, they would be examining who Mingsi had spoken to, who were the last people that had seen her. Obviously, in this case, Darren Grundy was virtually living at Mingsi Yang's address.
Darren Grundy would likely to have been the last person to see Mingsi Yang alive. He's the person who's in a current relationship with her. He's the person who discovered the body.
Mingsi Yang's fiancé, Darren Grundy, is taken in for questioning. And it isn't long before the police make an announcement.
Darren Grundy is arrested on suspicion of the murder of Mingsi Yang. He's taken into police custody, and the police think that they have their man.
All of Darren's clothing was seized and submitted to the laboratory for examination.
The police were convinced it obviously had the hallmarks of a crime of passion.
It's been 24 hours since the body of 29-year-old student Mingsi Yang was discovered at her home in the Lincoln suburb of Sinsel-Bank. And police have arrested her fiancé, 32-year-old Darren Grundy, on suspicion of murder.
Darren Grundy was the person that reported her death and was also possibly the last person to see her alive.
He was taken into police custody, during which time he's questioned and the police seek to gather further evidence and information to strengthen their case.
Police believe the attack on Mingsi was carried out by someone who knew her.
Police were convinced that this was a crime of passion. It's not unusual with crimes of passion that the victim is badly beaten. Mingsi had been beaten and sustained over 20 injuries.
The hallmarks of a crime of passion, I would say, are extreme violence, humiliation, degradation, that sort of thing. Doing something that's really personal, so, you know, destroying something that really means a lot to somebody. And often it is extreme, gratuitous violence, where there's clearly been some kind of loss of self-control, because it's such a personal issue.
Now in police custody, Darren faces intense questioning from detectives.
The interview of a murder suspect is different from the interview of a witness. It's far more detailed. The officers that interview a murder suspect will be specially trained, and they use tactics and techniques with the intention of getting as much information as possible. During the interviews, Darren Grundy maintains that he went to work that day and he was trying to get hold of Mingsi Yang during the day. He couldn't get hold of her, so he decided to leave work early. And he came home from work early and he found her dead in the home.
But police aren't convinced by his account and detain him further.
In order to hold someone in custody for more than 36 hours, the police need to go to a magistrate's court in order to keep that person in custody. So this is a serious situation for Darren Grundy. He's in custody, and obviously the police think that they have their man.
When police receive forensic results from Darren Grundy's clothing, the findings change the course of the investigation.
When we looked at Darren's clothing in the laboratory, there was no blood spattering on there. The blood staining on him was quite minimal, and it's not what Andy would expect from the perpetrator. I would expect to find a lot of small spots of blood on the perpetrator's clothing, especially around his lower legs. If you imagine when Mingsy's moving around the room and she's being constantly struck, the blood is spattering onto that radiator. Those small spots of blood will also spatter back onto the assailant. Didn't see anything like that at all on Darren's clothing.
But then a member of the public comes forward with some information that turns the case on its head.
The Sincilbank area of Lincoln is a very tight-knit community, and following the news of Mingsy's death, the teenage boy who was in the Sincilbank area on the morning of Mingsy's murder did come forward. He reported to police that he had seen a cyclist loitering very closely to the back passage of Mingsy's address.
The young boy saw a man on the pedal cycle cycling around this area, and he actually saw him go into an alleyway, which is where the address in question is.
He remembered clearly that that cyclist was wearing a blue workman's helmet rather than a cycling helmet. He made eye contact with the cyclist and then watched as he wheeled that bike into Mingsy's passageway.
But who was the cyclist? And could they be responsible for Mingsy's murder? The physical description the boy gives narrows down his identity.
This key witness reported to police the cyclist was also of East Asian appearance. The police now had to explore people who knew Mingsy matching that description.
And at this point, the police become aware that actually they've been looking at the wrong man. And they focus their inquiries in a different direction.
Darren Grundy is released without charge. And attention now falls on an individual from Mingsy's past.
The description of the cyclist matched Mingsy's ex-husband, Mr. Sang.
Wai Hong Sang had already provided police with a convincing alibi, saying he was over 40 miles from Mingsy's home on the day of her murder, enjoying a day out biking at Sherwood Pines Forest.
Mr. Sang has a solid alibi. He had travelled to Sherwood Pines, where he had spent the day trail biking. So police are then tasked with establishing his movements exactly and whether it is possible that this cyclist could be Mr. Sang. In the eyes of the investigation, there is obviously a big difference between police suspecting that this cyclist may be Mr. Sang and may have committed the murder, but proving it to a jury is obviously a whole different matter.
In an attempt to track down the mysterious individual spotted by a local teenager, police trawl through thousands of hours of CCTV from across Lincoln.
There are so many CCTV cameras now, private, local authority. People have them on their houses as well. It's a real critical part of any murder investigation. The police will be looking at trying to find that person at that location or as close as possible, and then trying to find where they went from there. Where did the cyclist come from? Ideally, what did they do whilst they were in the area, and then where did they go afterwards?
And after hours of rigorous detective work, police finally spot the cyclist.
What it actually showed was that this particular cyclist, who was quite distinctive in description, particularly with a hat that he was wearing, was picked up on 40 separate occasions in 16 different locations in and around the Lincoln City area. The route of the cyclist was quite clear from the footage that he'd come into the city in the early hours of the morning, then made his way out of the city again.
The man is seen cycling away from Lincoln just after 9 a.m, around 3 hours before Mingsy's body was discovered. Detectives analyze the footage to see if the cyclist in question is indeed Mingsy's ex-husband, Wai Hong Sang.
One of the main difficulties in proving identity of someone on CCTV is the quality of the footage. It's vastly improved since many years ago when it was really poor, but you still do have systems now, for one reason or another, that are not particularly clear. They're grainy. You may struggle to identify someone.
With the identity of the cyclist still unclear from the CCTV footage, police bring Sang in for questioning.
The police will be looking at his background, his movements and his relationship, trying to gather as much information. They'll be looking at inconsistencies with his account, and it may be that he can't give certain information. So they'll be trying to build up a case against him using the factual information that they know and anything which can either confirm or disprove his account.
Under caution, Sang gives the same account he provided in his written statement.
Wei Sang told the police that he had gone to Sherwood Pines in Nottingham. He'd driven there, he'd driven straight there from his home address in Grimsby, and he'd been there for the duration of the day. He was also able to produce some receipts from parking in the Nottingham area and a petrol receipt as well.
Despite Sang providing receipts to prove his alibi, police attempt to investigate his digital footprint by looking into his phone activity on the day.
He had turned his phone off when he left home, which he said was the usual thing that he would do when he was going trail biking.
So what the police decided to do instead was to examine the sat-nav on his car.
And what officers discover reveals a major hole in Sang's story.
The inbuilt car sat-nav actually showed that he hadn't gone directly from Grimsby to Nottingham, but he'd driven from Grimsby to Lincoln, where he'd parked in a lay-by for at least 2 hours, and then afterwards had then gone to Nottingham. So there was a huge hole in the alibi.
It's a shocking revelation. Police now know Sang was parked up in a lay-by on the outskirts of Lincoln on the day of Mingzi's murder. Could it be that Sang had cycled from this location to Mingzi's home in Sinsel Bank? Police look again at the CCTV of the suspicious cyclist.
The analysis of the cyclist and the CCTV showed quite clearly, with the times involved, that he would have had the opportunity to have parked his vehicle on the outskirts of Lincoln, cycled into Lincoln to Mingzi's address, killed Mingzi, and then cycled back out of the city again, back to his car, and then driven to Sherwood Pines in Nottingham, where he claimed that he'd been all day.
This key CCTV evidence proved Mr. Sang did have the time available to cycle into Lincoln and murder his ex-wife.
But the CCTV footage is still unable to prove if Wai Hong Sang was at Mingzi's home on the day of the murder. The only evidence police have is circumstantial and unlikely to hold up in court. But then, forensic results from a search at Sang's address returned from the lab.
The police submit various items for forensic examination from Wai Sang. There were items which were actually purchased after he'd separated from Mingzi Yang.
We examined a number of items from him, including a watch. The watch, when you looked at it with a naked eye, it didn't look as though there was anything on it at all. So I think the watch had probably been cleaned. But in the laboratory, once we could look at it using a low-power microscope, we could manipulate the hinges, the links, and you could see that in between the links there were some small blood stains. Those samples of blood stains were then subject to DNA profiling tests, and the blood was attributable to Mingzi.
As well as the traces of Mingzi's blood found on her ex-husband's watch, further shocking evidence is found on a bicycle belonging to Sang.
The bike that we examined was a different bicycle from the bike in the CCTV, but it was in the car on the day. The initial visual examination of that bicycle, we couldn't find any blood. But once we got it in the laboratory with specialised lighting and the low-power microscope, there was a small blood stain that was located on the handlebar. Again, that was subject to DNA profiling test, and that came back blood attributable to Mingsi. So, from my examination of these objects, it was obvious that he has tried to cover all of his tracks, and he has done so quite successfully because we've only found these two small blood stains. We examined many other items from that individual and didn't find anything on them. And he's obviously done a good job of covering his tracks, but these minute traces left in these difficult to locate areas is what indicated that he was the perpetrator.
Wai Hong Tsang is charged with the murder of his ex-wife, Mingsi Yang.
The police have circumstantial evidence. They have Wai Tsang in Lincoln, in the area at the time of the murder. They have the forensic evidence that links him as well. What they haven't got is a specific motive or a reason why he's committed this awful attack on his ex-wife.
Police obviously believed they had their man, but now they had to prove a motive. Why had Mr. Tsang chosen to kill his ex-wife?
33-year-old Wai Hong Tsang has been charged with the murder of his ex-wife, 29-year-old Mingsi Yang, in the Sinselbank area of Lincoln. Having pleaded not guilty, the case is sent for trial.
Mr. Tsang's trial was heard at Lincoln Crown Court, which is a very old courtroom in the grounds of Lincoln Castle. It is all a wood panel building. The judge sits high above the courtroom in a wooden seat. The defendant sits opposite in the dock, and witnesses give evidence to his right. It is a very personal experience for everybody in the room.
As any officer involved in a murder case, you always will feel an amount of apprehension before a murder trial, because no matter how strong the case appears to be, and no matter how happy you are with how the investigation has gathered pace and been concluded at that point, there's always an opportunity and a chance that something could come up during the trial that could change the direction of things. And even if it is a technicality or something that doesn't directly impinge on the actual case itself, sometimes that can be something that influences a jury in a kind of negative way.
As the trial begins, local reporter Richard Van Plu observes Mingsi's alleged killer in the courtroom.
Tsang was very composed. He was obviously a very intelligent man and was following the proceedings intently, but showed little emotion.
The prosecution opens their case against Tsang.
The prosecution presented a strong case, backed by the CCTV evidence and the sat-nav evidence, but it wasn't an overwhelming case.
The prosecution in the case were looking to show that there was a degree of pre-planning and preparation in this case. The way that Wai Tsang had behaved, the fact that he'd lied about where he'd been, that he came to Lincoln in his vehicle, then came on his pedal cycle into the city centre. The fact that there were so many injuries inflicted on Mingsi Yang, it was clearly a personal attack, and it was clearly something that he'd planned, and he'd tried to cover his tracks very carefully.
The pathology evidence presented at trial showed that the injury that most likely killed Mingsi was a brutal wound to the head, but the murder weapon was never recovered, and the prosecution suggested that this meant it was carried out by somebody with premeditation who had taken that weapon away and made sure that it wasn't found.
To the courtroom's surprise, Tsang agrees to give evidence.
As a journalist in the courtroom, you sit in a wood-panelled seat right next to the witness box where Mr. Tsang gave evidence. And confronted by the evidence from the sat-nav, Tsang gave an account that he did leave his car in the lay-by near Lincoln. This differed from the account that he initially gave the police.
Sang agrees that yes, he did go to Lincoln, but rather than going into Lincoln City on a push bike, he said that he drove to the outskirts of Lincoln, he parked in a lay-by, and he slept for a couple of hours.
And the reason he gave for not telling the police this during his first account was that he didn't want his new partner to find out that he'd been sleeping.
The prosecution confronts Sang with the CCTV footage from the day of the murder. They are convinced this is Sang heading towards Sincil Bank.
Sang was adamant that the cyclist in the blue work helmet was not him, and that he remained in his car asleep on the outskirts of Lincoln.
Wei Sang denies being the person on the pedal cycle. He simply says it's not him.
Despite the overwhelming forensic evidence against Sang, the court are yet to hear a motive behind the killing. But then, details of Mingzi and Zhang's marriage are revealed to the jury.
It's revealed that there was a history of coercion and abuse from Wei Sang against Mingzi Yang. It's been going on for some time before they actually divorced. Domestic abuse is very rarely isolated. It's something that will often go on, perhaps for years. I read a statistic recently that said that there were 50 incidents of domestic abuse that would normally occur before someone calls for help. And the victim will often put up with abuse or coercion for a long period of time before they eventually come to the point where they actually ask for help. Mingzi Yang had actually reported previous incidents of domestic abuse to Humberside Police on 3 separate occasions before she moved to Lincoln, and actually before Darren Grundy had come onto the scene.
In 2012, Mingzi divorced from Sang and moved to Lincoln to start a new life for herself. The pair then only saw each other when handing over their son to one another as part of an arrangement made by the court. The abuse that she had suffered appeared to have ended. But then, relations with her former husband took a sudden drop.
During the trial, it was established that the divorce between Mingzi and Sang had not been straightforward. There had been some disagreements over the custody of their son. And obviously, that is something that can raise very high emotions.
Mingzi and Sang had initially settled on shared custody of their son. But in the lead up to that fateful morning, it appears Mingzi had put in motion plans to end this.
They shared custody, but the prosecution put the motive on the basis that he got a letter a few days before where she wanted more custody of their son.
Wei Sang had received at least one letter in relation to those custody arrangements, so it's believed that actually Mingzi Yang was looking to see more of her son, and Wei Sang wasn't happy with that, and this potentially was the reason why he killed her. In my experience, in a case involving children and personal relationships, it can be something on the face of it quite simple, and in isolation perhaps not as serious, that can send somebody over the edge. Could potentially be a build-up of tension and stress over a period of time, and the person just kind of snaps.
In January 2015, the jury at Lincoln Crown Court returns its verdict. Wei Hong Zhang is found guilty of Mingzi Yang's murder. He is sentenced to a minimum of 28 years in prison.
At the end of the trial, the jury returned a guilty verdict on the charge of murder. They were obviously convinced by the prosecution case and returned an extremely quick verdict for a murder case. They took just 2 hours to find Sang guilty.
Wei Sang, I would say, was a cold-hearted individual, self-centred, deceitful, and clearly very violent.
But with his cleverly constructed alibi, initially deceiving police, was there a chance that Sang could have walked away with murder?
This case stands out because the murderer prepared a very clever alibi before carrying out the killing. It is not unusual for people to try and create an alibi after they carry out a murder or a killing. But in my career as a crime reporter, there are probably only 2 or 3 other cases where someone has gone to such great lengths.
He's sat down and thought this through. He's obviously an intelligent person. He's covered his tracks. He just tells me that, yeah, he is that kind of cold, calculated kind of a person.
If it wasn't for the blood on the bike and the watch, although he is on the outskirts of Lincoln, it's not beyond reasonable doubt that a jury could have been convinced that he wasn't a cyclist.
The case really turned on the forensic evidence. You know, he may well have got away with that murder in years gone by, but fortunately with the advances in forensic science and the specialist CCTV that's available and the experts nowadays, he was quite rightly tracked down and sentenced.
If this murder had happened 30 years ago, at the start of my career, it's probably quite unlikely that he would have been convicted.
With Sang now behind bars, the community reflects on the impact Mingzi's death has had on her family.
It's so traumatic. She was so young and she moved here, she wanted a better life, but she hasn't witnessed the whole life yet.
I think this case is shocking in terms of the level and the nature of the injuries. The sentence reflects the seriousness of the offence. Hopefully it may bring some small comfort to Mingzi's family moving forward. But at the end of the day, nothing will bring Mingzi Yang back, and it leaves a young boy growing up without his mother.